to talk about two of the greatest Canucks to ever lace up the skates for your Vancouver Canucks. We have one of the greatest Canucks broadcasters of all time on the line right now, Jim Robson, the original voice of the Canucks, joining us. Jim, thanks for joining us today on Sportsnet 650. How are you, sir?
Oh, just fine.
Number one, what's going through your mind right now hearing about Henrik and Daniel Sedin retiring at the end of this season?
Well, it's mixed emotions, as most people, I think, would understand. There's sadness involved, but there's also happiness for them because they've called the shots. I really expected they would announce it in the off-season rather than with 3 games left in the schedule to sort of avoid all this reaction and the spotlight, which I don't think they would necessarily want. But through whatever circumstances that resulted in this decision, I was surprised to hear it announced with 3 games left in the season. I'm not surprised that they made the announcement, and to be honest with you, I'm happy for them that they've announced it now rather than add another year. They've gone through so much, so long, and had criticism that was undeserved. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that another year would be the best thing for them. And this is the best thing for them, and that is what's most important.
Well, that's absolutely right, Jim. I mean, we just mentioned this. I mean, they had to be convinced to even talk about the fact that they donated $1 million to the BC Children's Hospital. So this must be something that, the organization tried to convince them because they don't want the attention, but I believe the fans really want to give them that love. And I bet you once they sort of see how the fans react to them, they may appreciate it a bit more, right?
Yes, I hope they do look back. There's the odd critic who's going to say, well, they never won a Stanley Cup, but they were never surrounded with enough depth to get through that. And we all remember the 2011 final, how battered up they were at the end of that playoff run. They had lost Manny Malhotra as a center iceman. Ryan Kessler was playing hurt after having a tremendous series against Nashville. So the saying in those days, I'm sure every coach in the league would say, all we have to do to beat the Canucks is stop the Sedins. Stop Henrik Sedin, you beat the Canucks. And, of course, in that series, and I don't think it's happened since in the series, the Bruins, after every whistle, were doing the face washes, the mugging, that it went on. And, of course, Chara, at every opportunity, hammered Henrik. So that you had to know they were playing battered and bruised by the end of that great run towards the Cup. So the fact that they never won a Stanley Cup should not in any way diminish what they've meant to the team, to the franchise, to the sport.
Jim, certainly throughout your career, you've watched a lot of great hockey players, especially represent this city and this team. Do Henrik and Daniel finish as the 2 greatest Canucks of all time, in your opinion?
Well, there was a caller you had a while ago when I was driving over the Lionsgate Bridge that talked about Pavel Bure, who I still think is the most exciting player, certainly, and in many ways the greatest player the Canucks have had. But when you add up all the qualities of the Sedins, as you've been talking about this morning, they are the greatest. And imagine that length of time with the franchise and all they've meant to it on and off the ice, and the way they handle their teammates. They're just so classy in everything they do, and I'm happy for them that they've been able to call the shots at the end of their career. I will not be surprised if they stay in Vancouver next winter. Their families are involved in activities in the city. This is where they've spent a lot of their time and grown up, and so I'm not sure what their plans are. I imagine they'll go back to Sweden in the summertime, but I would not be surprised if they still spend some time in Vancouver in retirement from hockey.
Jim, what was more impressive to you regarding Henrik and Daniel? Was it their intelligence on the ice and their skill, or was it their character and just who they were as human beings away from the game?
Well, there's just so many ways to express how much they've meant to the organization and the sport in this city. I don't know where to start. There's so much of it's off the ice. But on the ice, I think the most impressive thing to me is how they took such a beating without retaliating. And in the playoffs and against Boston, when Daniel Sedin was punched 6 times in the face by Marchand, then turned to the official and said, "How many times does he have to hit me before he gets a penalty?" And they gave Daniel Sedin, the leading scorer in the league at that season, a 10-minute misconduct. Does that make any sense at all? I mean, the way they took it, year after year, month after month, game after game, never retaliated, took an awful beating, and still played a tremendous number of games, some and without missing a game in a season. It's pretty remarkable how anyone can go through that without ending their career a lot sooner.
Well, Jim, does that not embody the real courage and toughness those two players really had?
Yes, and that's what coaches said about them. They talk about what is toughness. Toughness isn't always dropping the gloves. It's taking hitting and taking what the abuse they took and the criticism they took. Some people in this city, too. It used to just bother me so much when I heard people call them the Sedins sisters. Such a low blow, such a awful label for someone to put on these athletes. And they had to handle all that, and they did with a tremendous courage, really. I always admired hockey players for playing with skill, courage, and character. And I can't think of any better examples of that than Daniel and Henrik Sedin.
Well, I mean, and that's high praise coming from you, Jim, considering you also watched Stan Smeel play, who was very similar in that regard as well. So, I mean, this organization has at least been very lucky when it comes to upstanding citizens representing the team, no?
I'm having a little difficulty hearing you guys, by the way. But, no, the only regret I have is that I never got to broadcast a game when the Sedins were playing.
Right.
I retired in 99. The last game I did was in April of 99, and that was the spring they were drafted. But I saw them play a lot of games, and I was around the team some, and I ran into them every once in a while. I still couldn't tell them apart. I didn't know whether I was talking to Daniel or Henrik, but I really enjoyed having those rare opportunities to visit with them. And I can tell you one story. Fairly recently, I was by the rink in Kitsilano, and I had a dinner appointment at the White Spot on Broadway, and I was a bit early, so I walked up to the Kits rink just to see if there was a kids' game going on, and there was a Sedin standing by the glass watching. And I walked in, and he turned and said, "What are you doing here?" And I said, "What are you doing here?" And it was Henrik Sedin, because there were 2 boys there. He introduced me to his 10-year-old son, and his 7-year-old was on the ice having a practice with I guess a Timbits or a Atom or whatever level it was, hockey. And so I had a good visit with him at that time. And at that time we talked a little bit about the career, and I told him then, I said, "You've taken such a pounding for so long." I said, "It's really appreciated." And I sort of didn't say it exactly, but I sort of felt I would fully understand if they announced their retirement at the end of this season.
Because, Jim, I mean, there's something to be said to go out when you're still a very good player, right? I mean, a lot of people say about you, Jim, I mean, you left probably before your time, but you felt that you were going to leave when you're still at the top of your game, and it looks like the Sedins are doing the same thing.
Well, that is great for an athlete to be able to do that, because so often it's hard to step away from that life, And some players have had difficulty with life after hockey. And the Canuck Alumni is an excellent organization. There was an event at the Rogers Arena last week in which the alumni had lunch with the current Canucks. And they mixed them up at tables. And I had the pleasure of sitting with Jyrki Lumi, Kirk McLean, and Brock Besser, and Corey Schneider, or Corey Hirsch. And so it was a really good event. And Bob Murray, the current president of the Canuck Alumni, spoke to the younger players and said, life after hockey isn't always easy. And if you need someone to turn to ask advice or coping with it, then feel free to talk to a member of the Canuck Alumni. And to be able to walk away from the game on your own terms is really special, and no one deserves it more than Henrik and Daniel.
Great words. Jim Robson, the former original voice of the Vancouver Canucks. Listen, a real pleasure for you calling in. We really appreciate it, Jim. We've always been big fans of yours, and we appreciate you giving us some time here to talk about Henrik and Danielson.
All right. Thanks for listening.
Thank you, Jim.
That is Jim Robson. Man, what a pleasure to hear from Jim. That voice, I get goosebumps anytime I get a chance to talk to Jim Robson. Anytime I see him at the game or I get a chance to chat with him. He has such a presence, and he has such a great perspective, and just listening to him on the radio just brings me back to
He could
when I was
still
a
be
kid.
in our business. Let's face it.
He could easily still do. I mean, how great does he just sound? I can just listen. Jim should just come and sit in studio and talk about the Sedins for an hour, and I'll just listen.
The Jim Hour.
Sportsnet 650.